we're back in Paris this episode for a tale that someone somewhere on the internet once described as an X-rated fairy tale. And I have to say, it's an apt descriptor of this woman's life, as we'll see.
Ooh. And who is she?
Liane de Pougy was born Anne-Marie Chassaigne in 1869 in La Flèche, which is in the Loire Valley. Literally born in a town called the Arrow. Though her mother wasn't expecting her until the 15th of the month because of a religious vision. So there's the
Interesting
first
start for the courtesan.
Yes, and as we'll see, this is not the only brush with religion in this tale. She is the youngest of four to a military father. In fact, her three brothers were quite a bit older than her. The eldest was 11 years older than her. So she's very much the baby of the family, and it is very much a military family. She also has grandparents involved in the military, and at least one brother also joins the military.
So this is really different from the reputation she comes to have later in her life.
Yes, this is a very conservative, old school family. And then there's her second mother, so to speak, Madame Navarre, a Creole woman from Martinique whom she called Mama Layla. The woman was a neighbor who was apparently there when Liane was born. Liane would hold the woman in high esteem throughout her life, bringing her first husband and a later fiancé to her for inspection, basically, though the woman told her husband looked too husbandish.
What does that mean?
We will see.
Hmm.
She also, on her deathbed, extracted a promise from de Pougy that she'd never go on the metro because there had just been a terrible accident on the newfangled machinery.
Wow, really puts you in the time and place, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. But before all that, we have 7-year-old Liane wanting to run away and join the circus because of a horseback rider she saw. She did not get her wish. Instead, she's sent to a convent.
Yeah, that's different. How is the convent treating her?
Well, you see, she's sent there for her education, though she's a bit rebellious, as even the Mother Superior would write to her mother about it early on. The lectures via letter didn't always secure good behavior, though, since she did one time kick a dentist who came to the convent to look over the pupils.
Oof. Is that, well, I guess if you think about dentists at the time, it was not what dentists are today. You know, you're not getting a nice little goodie bag at the end of it. You're probably getting horrible drill sounds and like no anesthetic for painful procedures. And I can picture that being a very scary time to go to the dentist.
Well, this was apparently just routine checking their teeth. She did have excellent teeth, we should note. Her kicking and screaming fuss, though, got her scolded by the Mother Superior.
I still don't blame her, but I see what you're saying.
She did get a good education there, however, she'd put it to use distinguishing herself amongst the other inhabitants of the demi-monde in Paris later on. This was obviously not what either her parents or her teachers had in mind when they had her educated.
Yeah. Sounds about the opposite of what they wanted.
Yes, she would spend 6 years in this school, though, fostering a love of literature and quite a few crushes on the staff.
Ooh, interesting.
That is until she runs off with a naval officer, which she hadn't thought she would do.
I mean, I guess none of us, in looking at the fullness of our future life, thinks, yes, I'll run away with a naval. So how does that happen? I mean, I guess she has been raised in a military family. I would imagine that she would have some sort of built-in respect for a military person.
The fact she's raised in a military family is why she specifically did want to marry a military man.
Mm-hmm. She's like, darn it, I thought I was going to be rebellious.
Well, this is rebellious, because she runs away from the convent, from her education at 16, to marry this naval officer she had started having a fling with.
Mm-hmm. So how did that go?
Well, they do marry July 15th, 1886. He is 8 years older than her.
Interesting, and she's 16.
Yes.
And as someone who is about the age of the husband, can I just say I don't look at a 16-year-old and think, I want to marry that. I think, wow, that's still a child.
Well, apparently, not only did he marry her, but there's a good chance she was pregnant before the marriage.
Ooh.
And now Mama Layla was not impressed with him, said he looked
Understandably.
say he looked too husbandish, and didn't think it would end well. And when she said he looked too husbandish, she meant apparently along the lines of too much of a you are a housefrau and I rule everything.
Yeah, and Leanne has already shown that she has her own mind and she makes her own rules and she does what she wants. So that does not sound like a good fit for her.
Oh, yeah, it most definitely does not end well. Now, there has been some debate over whether or not he abused her on their wedding night.
Sounds like
Some
a
pe-
great guy.
some people believe Leanne made up this story later when she was a courtesan because La Belle Otero has a story of being sexually abused as a child.
Oh, it's all the rage.
Apparently, if you're a courtesan in La Belle Epoque, the debate comes because some sources say she was already pregnant by him at the time of the marriage. Either way, he did not prove a good husband. There's a story that he caught her in bed with a lover later and shot her in the wrist.
Ooh, disproportionate.
So she sells her only belonging, a piano, leaves her infant son with his father, and heads for Paris. Her husband would file for divorce in 1889, and it was granted in 1890. He would also send their son, Mark, sometimes called Marco, to live with paternal grandparents.
How does she feel about that? I mean, obviously she doesn't want to be tethered to this life and to this guy who, abusive or not, sounds like not a great guy.
She enjoys being free of him. On her maternal feelings, she would write later in her notebooks that her son was like a living doll given to a little girl.
Hmm. That sounds like, well, she's 16 right now, so she's not ready to be a mother.
17 at the time of Mark's birth.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry,
yes,
17, totally ready to be a mother now.
no, she admits she was not the best of mothers. She could have done a lot better.
Yeah, but no, that just sounds like awful circumstances to try to do that. I mean, and it doesn't sound like she has any familial support because she's kind of cut herself off from that. So,
Well, she has especially cut herself off from family by running away, getting divorced, and becoming a courtesan.
yeah, no, that would do it. So, I guess good thing that the child has paternal grandparents to look after him, someone in his life who cares about him.
Now, in Paris in 1890, she stays with a friend who happens to live in an area where high level courtesans frequently live. Seeing one such woman from her friend's window, she decides to become a courtesan herself.
I love that.
So she changes her name to Liane de Pougy, the de Pougy part probably coming from a Comte or Vicomte de Pougy, who was a client, and joins the demi-monde, though not initially as a courtesan but as a femme galante, a kept woman below the status of a courtesan.
Hmm. So, what does that entail? What's the difference?
In the demi-monde, there are levels of prostitution, basically. From the common streetwalker, the girl working in a brothel, the girl who works in a hat shop and does prostitution on the side to add to meager wages. And then there are the women who aren't quite up to the level of courtesans, like their lovers are not dukes or anything. They might be the guy who owns a bar.
Gotcha. So, it's like high flying, but not quite up there yet. She hasn't proven herself.
Not truly high flying, not fabulous jewels and well known in postcards with her face on them.
Yet.
This doesn't happen until she meets her mentor, Valtesse de la Bigne, and then she becomes a courtesan due to Valtesse's tutelage. Valtesse literally teaches her everything from how to manage her finances to what techniques to use in the bedroom. For instance, she once admonished Dupuy for letting a man see her legs for free.
Ooh.
As she said in horror one day, "What? He saw your legs and he did not pay? He must pay."
I love this.
Yes, it was a mistake never made again.
No, of course. She has learned.
Yes, Valtesse is also the reason Leanne would become associated with the pearl. As her mentor said, every courtesan needs a trademark. And Leanne,
Branding!
yes, branding. You brand yourself as a courtesan. Leanne chose the pearl because the image she wanted was one of pale, smooth perfection. Though, fun fact, she also wore a pearl encrusted large cross necklace during this time. You can see it in a few photos.
I love the little callback to her former religious life.
She apparently is quite religious for almost all her life. By 1891, she's getting mentions in the magazine Gil Blas, which is not entirely a gossip magazine. We should note it also serialized novels. One of her early involvements is with the Duc de Macmahon, who she brings to tears when he asks how many lovers she's had before. She
Brings
said
to tears.
yes, because she says 43, which was an outrageous lie at the time, but he believed her.
That just seems like a lot.
As a courtesan, it's probably not a lot.
How, okay, just logistically, like, how many people are you going out with, like, per week, say? Like, there's 52 weeks in a year, right? Like, it's just a lot of people. And, like, different, and because you want to keep up with, like, you want to have regular clients, so.
As a courtesan, most of your work is regular clients, usually called protectors, that there's one or two at a time and there's switches sometimes. Sometimes it can go on for years, sometimes only a few months. Sometimes you bankrupt the man, and sometimes his wife puts an end to it.
Mm.
Another man is Lord Carnarvon. And yes, I mean that Lord Carnarvon, the Egyptologist with Howard Carter finding King Tut's tomb.
Oh, interesting.
Basically, her career as a courtesan is taking off at rocket speed, in no small part due to Valtessa's help.
I love it. This is like in movies where you have like the makeover scene, and then after that, she's like getting so much attention.
In the meantime, Leanne does briefly try theater. She performs at the Folies Bergère. I've even seen a video of her on stage at some point that is floating around the internet if you want to go looking for it. She also receives a few acting lessons from the leading actress of the day, Sarah Bernhardt, who advises her to keep her pretty mouth shut and to display her beauty when on stage.
Right. We recall the Sarah Bernhardt episode where Sarah Bernhardt was less than thrilled with De Pougy's acting skills.
Oh, yes, dear listener, Liane de Pougy really couldn't act, and she knew it too.
Oh.
The, the brief appearances were only for publicity. Her work, though, be it acting or being a courtesan, would take her everywhere from Spain to Russia down to Italy. She'd end up being multilingual because of this.
Nice. And I guess the acting makes sense is like before you had commercials or ads on things. How do you advertise who you are? I mean, yeah, word of mouth, and I'm sure the postcards helped a lot. But if you are performing in front of a large number of people, they can see how charming and magnetic your personality is, and they might want a bit more of that.
Or how charming other things are.
Mm-hmm. Physical qualities.
During this time, though, she's not really in touch with her relatives. Her father dies when he's 80, and her sisters in law don't want her at the funeral.
Understandably, although, oof, that's rough.
And yes, in their terms, which was, you should note, a rather common way of talking about courtesans at this time, they said they did not want that creature at the funeral.
Wow.
She's also not talking to her mother. She does, however, visit her son sometimes. He still lives with his paternal grandparents, that is, until he goes to school in England.
What's their relationship like? Like, do they communicate a lot? Do they write letters or anything?
They don't communicate a lot, no. It's a rather strained relationship. Your mother, who dumped you with your father, who doesn't see you, is off gallivanting around Europe with wealthy men.
Yeah, I can see how at the time with the social attitudes they had, he would not look upon that favorably, probably, and also would probably feel pretty, rejected or lonely or something.
Yes, it probably also doesn't help that she dabbles with opium and cocaine.
Oof. Now, by dabbles, do you mean is low grade addicted, or do you mean actually dabbles?
Actually dabbles. There doesn't seem to be even a low-grade addiction with her.
Well, that's good at least. Nice change from some of the other people here. I mean, and not, of course, I'm not saying that there's something like horrible about addicts. It's just you don't want to get addicted to opium and cocaine. And I'm glad that for once someone has escaped that.
Yes, on a positive note, though, in her personal life, there is Emmeline de Lençon.
Oh,
Now, de Lençon is another courtesan of what are called Le Grand Trois of this time, the other two being La Belle Otero and Liane de Pougy herself. So, the top three courtesans of the era. And the two started an affair.
good for them.
Liane wrote years later that Emmeline had tricked her into underdressing for an occasion while she herself swanned in late, all decked out. But Liane quickly forgave her. She couldn't stay mad. And 2 days later, Emmeline had installed herself into Pougy's carriage at her table, in her theater box, and in her bed, all, she wrote, to her great pleasure.
Nice. So wait, was that intentionally like Emily trying to um like outfox her to win more clients or something? Or was that her like flirting in a weird way? Or do we not know?
I want to say it's just the typical battles between courtesans of who is better, and it does well for publicity.
Hmm. Because as we know, women can't exist without being in competition with each other. But for once, these women are actually using that idea to their advantage.
The affair isn't hidden, though.
Hmm.
Gil Blas once put out an issue jokingly announcing that the two would soon be married and predicted a child would also soon appear.
Nice.
Now, Valtess, her mentor, considered this all to be foolish. She thought Liane was wasting time. After all, a courtesan is basically old at 20.
How old is Leon at the time?
I want to say early 20s, early to mid
Gotcha.
20s.
So she is aging out.
Yes. Anyway, the affair ends, but this is not the last time that Leanne's career as a courtesan would be threatened by a pretty woman.
Oh no.
That other woman, though, was not La Belle Otero.
No, because that would be so hilarious.
No, instead, she had a much more rivalrous relationship with the Spanish courtesan. Liane and Otero's rivalry came to a head when they both decided to attend the same opening night. Wanting to outshine her rival, Otero spread the word that she would arrive with the most incredible diamond jewelry. And she did arrive, covered in jewels, every inch of cloth covered in gemstones.
Imagine being there and you see her like that.
And then Leanne entered. The crowd was dumbfounded. Though she wore no jewelry, her maid walked in behind her wearing an extravagant dress and the entirety of her jewelry collection.
Ooh, fight!
La Belle Otero was now compared to a lowly maid, and Leanne won the fight. And for everyone who cannot see, I'm using quotations on fight.
Right, because they're still like this is good for both of their images because Otero is going to do something to outshine Leanne at some point, and they're going to go back and forth, and they're both going to gain a lot of publicity when people talk about this.
She also became friends with Jean Lorrain, a gay French writer.
Ooh,
Naturally,
solidarity.
naturally, people said that Sodom and Gomorrah finally met in person.
That's cute, although if you know the actual story of Sodom and Gomorrah, um, not great as a comparison. Like I know it's tongue in cheek, but anyway, go on.
There is actually a cartoon that you can still find on the internet of her stealing him from Otero.
Oh, had he been with Otero before?
He had been one of her confidants before.
Wow, that is too. I see. I really hope that they aren't genuinely like hurting each other, and that this is all for the show.
Well, they didn't always get on, but sometimes later on, Leanne writes in her notebooks and her journals rather favorably. Like, she doesn't call Otero a washed up hag when they're old. She actually compliments her.
Mhm. Gotcha. Okay, so there was some like professional respect between them.
Then in 1898, she became a writer herself. Her first novel, The Elusive One, and her next one in 1899 are what are termed courtesan novels. The
Ooh.
name
No, what is this?
the name is not only in reference to the fact that the writers are courtesans, it's also about how the novels typically take on the portrayal of their profession in Alexandre Dumas's The Lady of the Camillas. And this is Dumas' fils, not the father, if for those listening. And it's about how that portrayal in The Lady of the Camellias is unrealistic.
Ah, so they have all kind of agreed to write about courtesanship in a particular way.
Well, the courtesans tend to write about what it's like being a courtesan from their own perspective, a lot of the time from their own life. A
Mm.
lot of this fiction is referred to as autofiction.
So it's like some kind of connection between autobiography and fiction that, as with a lot of other writers that we've talked about in this group, they are interested in exploring their life in the modern times, but with a bit of a fictionalized element to it.
One might say, in fact, that this is also Leanne's way of coping with the trauma of her profession.
Hmm. Why had it been traumatic?
Well, with being a courtesan and also getting to the top, a lot of the time you get very strange requests and you can't exactly say no.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds like that would be interesting things to live through.
Her novels are pot boilers. They just sell out so quickly.
Hmm.
Everyone wants to read them.
Wow. So they want her perspectives. I guess that makes sense. She has kind of um been doing this whole ad campaign making people want to have some connection with her, and I'm sure a book is cheaper than attending something with her or something like that.
A book is also going to increase her revenue.
Hmm.
After all, one can't be a courtesan forever. And then there is a truly serious threat to her career.
Hmm.
She meets a blonde American going by the name of Florence Temple Bradford. Only months
Hmm.
later would she learn the woman's actual name is Natalie Clifford Barney.
Shock horror. Why would why would she do that? Why the
Why
fake
would
name?
Oh, the fake name, and for reference, she would continue to call her Flossie even after finding out. The fake name is partly because Natalie, at this time, her father is still alive. She hasn't inherited her fortune yet, and she's very much living in her parents' house.
Yeah, no, it's just like not ideal conditions for seduction, but
But seduction occurs nonetheless.
because it's Natalie.
This audacious American sent flowers with mysterious notes and then showed up at her house in costume, declaring herself a page of love sent by Sappho.
Hmm. Subtle.
Since when is young Natalie Barney ever subtle?
No, never.
Never, and they become inseparable. For instance, Natalie rents a house near where her family is vacationing for the summer for Leanne to stay in so she can go see her. They see Sarah Bernhardt perform and are very indiscreet in the covered box by the stage. Leanne writes a novel based on the affair with the help of Natalie. Natalie even goes so far as to convince her then fiance, who she already had gotten to agree to a sexless marriage, to adopt Leanne after the marriage so that she doesn't have to be a courtesan anymore. He didn't
Wow.
he didn't agree to that plan.
No. Wow, Natalie, that's really pushing it.
Yes, and Natalie is younger than her, than
Hmm.
Leanne.
Hmm.
So it would be a very, very odd adoption. How do you even adopt a fully grown woman who's older than you?
Yeah, seems like a weird thing to do.
But Natalie doesn't have her fortune on her own yet, so what else can she do?
Right. Yeah.
And there were also various back and forth blowups, in part over Leanne being a courtesan.
Oh no, is Natalie being like weird and sex negative and stuff?
To an extent, she doesn't like what Liane does, but they had also had a pact at one point that Liane's work would only be with men. However, Liane breaks that because she also ends up with the wife of one client,
Hmm.
and Natalie finds this out in Italy when she follows her there.
Natalie!
There's also the fact at one point she actually takes Natalie to Valtessa's house, goes into a room with her mentor, locks the door, and in her own words, refused Valtess nothing, much amused at the thought of Flossie suffering on the other side of the door.
I'm so sorry. What? I had thought of Feltess as like a mentor figure. This is not. This is different. Although I guess
Valtess,
she did teach her uh methods to be used as a courtesan, so I can see how they might have had previous experience.
yes, and Valtess isn't the most emotionally involved with anything physical.
Gotcha. Yeah, I imagine after a long time in that work, particularly as you were saying, not being able to refuse things easily, you would kind of become detached, or
Yes,
that would be a coping mechanism.
and as we have seen before, Valtess is quite a guard dog, so to speak, about Leanne's career.
Hmm.
With, I have built you up into this magnificent courtesan, given you this career, and now you're wasting it on women.
Yeah, no, I can see kind of wanting to um, do anything that hurts Natalie.
And not so much that hurts Natalie as just gets Leanne to stop having such a serious affair with Natalie, because Natalie is a very serious threat to her protege's career as a courtesan.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
The affair is not the end of their involvement, though, and the affair does peter out eventually. But they stay friends. In fact, during Natalie's affair with the poet Renee Vivian, Leanne was one of the people she asked to go talk to Vivian during a period when the poet refused to speak to Natalie.
Right. Interesting. Have your exes talk to each other and that'll make things better.
It was not the best choice. However, Leanne and Vivian end up becoming friends as well.
Because that is what does happen in sapphic communities.
Though Vivian, as we know, dies young of complications from anorexia and alcoholism. But we will see Natalie again. In the meantime, Leanne is now in her 30s and she reconciles with her mother.
Oh, how?
Well, from where I'm standing, it might have something to do with writing books and not just being a courtesan, because now her mom's calling her an artist.
Gotcha. So as long as she's like interpreting her experiences into something kind of separated from the fact, then her mother can appreciate that as art. Good, I guess, whatever works.
And the same cannot be said for her son.
Oh, oh no.
It's 1904 and he's 17. He's very much a teenager, not studying, now smoking. Admittedly, it's pre World War One. There's a lot of people smoking. They haven't caught on to the lung cancer yet.
Oh no. Yeah. And he thinks that his mother is so uncool.
Yes, but unfortunately for Leanne, like mother, like son, he moved to Paris and had mistresses.
Oh. Um, was he like a courtesan or was he like was it
No,
just
no.
mistresses?
It was just mistresses, partying, living a sort of lifestyle that had also seduced his mother when she got to
Hmm.
Paris, basically. And then they decided to fight via letter because she does not approve. So he then takes off for India and French Indochina to become a stunt pilot. He actually picks up a mechanic, Raoul Lefbury, the man who would go on to found the Lafayette Escadrille, the American volunteer French aviation unit in World War One. And Leanne would read about her son and his exploits in newspapers.
I mean, that's good, I guess, but that sounds like he's doing something incredibly dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous. Early airplanes are not the most safe. For
Hmm.
instance, the cockpit is open to the air, and as you go higher up in the atmosphere, the air thins out and also gets really cold. And then Mama Layla died in 1905.
Oof. Oh no. So she is alienated from her son, and this mother figure in her life dies.
Yes, and then also her friend Jean Lorrain dies in 1906. I always feel like we have a domino death effect in these episodes. It can't just be one person.
Right. It's always like a cluster of horrible events.
Yes, and while she could attend the funeral of Mama Layla, she's too far away to attend Jean's funeral. However, the tide turns again, the turntables.
Mm-hmm. Oh, how the turntables.
She meets 24-year-old Prince George Gica, son of a Romanian diplomat with a great aunt who married the King of Serbia. He is also 15 years her junior, and some people actually mistook her for his mother.
Interesting.
People also didn't like such a young man from the upper class being smitten by a courtesan.
Right, because she is of course the wrong class for him, and certainly it would be fine if he were older than her and therefore had like even more power and advantage over her, but her being older than him and having more knowledge of the world means that there's an uncomfortable power dynamic that people can't get
Yes, his love of Mills was a problem.
behind. Ugh, MILF rights.
It should also be noted that the only ways out of this profession of hers were either make enough money to retire or to marry well, though marrying well didn't always guarantee that society would then treat you well.
Right, it was just your pension. It was not. Oh, and I imagine also like when you are marrying up, um, you have to contend with people constantly thinking like, "Oh wow, look at that gold digger," and maybe they would have treated you fine if you were just the courtesan that they saw everywhere and thought was really pretty, but because you've like they think you've tried to like insinuate yourself into the society, they kind of hate you for it. So it's a rough life.
Yes, there is a story of a courtesan who married into basically minor British nobility and married for love, but her husband dies while on assignment in India, and she returns to England and she's just completely shunned.
So that's what Leanne has to look forward to in her retirement.
Yes, however, that is still quite a ways away. But naturally, their marriage in 1910 caused a stir. Her previous husband is already dead. This is convenient in the eyes of the Catholic Church because they don't have to deal with the whole divorce issue. They can just say she's a widow instead.
So she's a courtesan, but heaven forbid she get divorced.
It is, however, a small ceremony. The Queen of Serbia is furious that a lowly courtesan once mistaken for a visiting queen at the opera is now a real life princess.
Well, at least she looks the part.
Her mother in law is less furious when she meets her, but she's now pulled off the equivalent of a fairy tale, basically. Also, her son doesn't attend the wedding, he's in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Are we to put this down to the fact that he's in Australia, or the fact that he has been reacting poorly to her life choices as she has been reacting poorly to his?
Probably both. Her mother is also still around and quite pleased. Valtes, on the other hand, dies about a month after the wedding.
No!
Valtes is quite old at this point, and Leanne does attend the funeral. It should also be noted that Leanne becomes the godmother of one of Valtes's granddaughters, Margot. Anyway, she now retires from being a courtesan and travels to Algeria with George, and for a while things are good. She more fully reconciles with her son, though her mom dies in 1912. And then she and George settle in France, and then World War One breaks out.
Man, I mean, I'm glad that she's having these positive relationships in her life, but it really seems like this period is just like one thing after another.
And it does not end there. Her son volunteers for the French air service. Leanne is not happy, and in fact, she says this is the first time she actually feels like a mother.
Oh,
George doesn't serve, though, he's not fit enough.
nice.
Mark does well. flies some 30 missions or so, and then dies in a landing accident on December 2nd, 1914.
No!
It sends her spiraling into religion. She spends the rest of the war coming to terms with his death. As she herself said later in her journal, she didn't love him enough when he was alive. This might be part of the reason she then leaves his room as is for about 5 years after his death.
Wow. I mean, it really, she just wasn't in good life circumstances to be able to, though. Like, you look at when she had him, she was a teenager and she didn't know how to handle this, and she was in a bad marriage that she needed to get out of, and she also needed to be making her own money, and she couldn't really be a mother at the same time as doing that. So she missed a lot of important time with her son just because of the way that her life was.
But life goes on. She starts her journals in 1919, and her journals would be published after her death. She's still in touch with Natalie Barney, even attends a few of her Friday salons, seems to have a good life with her husband, and then she also meets the Duchess, Lily de Gramont.
Oh, interesting.
Now, just because Liane was married doesn't mean that either her or her husband were monogamous.
Oh, did
She
they
was
have an agreement?
Yes, she was fully able to keep loving women. So she and Natalie can cavort while Lily and George talk. Otherwise, George was content to play the flute.
Love it.
The problem occurs when she becomes particularly enamored with Lily. The problem being Natalie gets jealous.
Natalie gets jealous, not her husband.
No, not her husband. So this ends the affair with Lily, and the friendship weathers this storm. The same cannot be said for the next two love triangles she's
The
involved
next
in.
two love triangles.
Yes, there's two.
Love it. Go on.
She and George both fall for a woman, Manon, nicknamed Tiny One. George runs off with her, leaving Liane, now in her mid-50s, alone with a broken heart.
Aww.
Natalie, ever the good friend, decides to basically create a heartbroken ambulance unit by showing up on her door with one of her own new lovers, the Italian Baroness Mimi Franchetti. Natalie intends for herself and Mimi to distract Liane.
Now,
It
when you
works.
said distract,
Yes, that level of distract.
hmm
It works a little too well, and Liane runs off with Mimi, leaving Natalie to write a book that has only recently been published. Go figure.
wow, no good deed goes unpunished.
Most assuredly not in these stories.
hmm
George does come back eventually. No, they do not share Mimi.
No, because that would just be too good.
Mimi herself apparently hangs around in the background until 1927, when she's replaced with another woman, Sonia, and then she consoles herself with Emmeline de Lenson afterwards.
Oh,
And
nice.
and Leanne is apparently the one who introduces the two.
I just love this. This is exactly how sapphics work today.
Some things never change.
hmm
However, her friendship with Natalie suffers. There is a story how the two run into each other on the street in the 1930s, and Leanne runs away rather than talk to Natalie.
Runs
This,
away.
yes, this after they hadn't seen each other for 8 years. It would also be the last glimpse they would ever have of each other.
Wow, what did they have, like a falling out, or did they just kind of drift apart?
From the way Leanne writes in her journals, it sounds like they drifted apart, and the jealousies arriving in the various love triangles do not help.
hmm
In the meantime, George isn't in the best of health. This is also the time where she and her husband stumble across the Asylum of St. Agnes, an institution that cared for children with birth defects. It makes a huge impression on her. There's no baths or showers, and everyone is miserable. It disturbs her. So she goes and raises money for it, and starts visiting every day for the time that they're in the area. In fact, such donors she induces include Coco Chanel amongst other friends and acquaintances. In fact, Chanel would be the leading benefactress of the institution.
Wow. So she is like making a big deal about this.
Yes, and also as she ages, she gets more religious.
Hmm.
However, her husband and his health take them away from the area again, but she keeps up with the charity through writing. All is not well, though. By 1931, she says she spent 5 years with an unhappy George.
Oh no.
He drinks, smokes, rails against everything, is a very bitter human being by all accounts.
Hmm.
Not at all the man who got into a fist fight for her honor in the streets of Paris with the husbands of women who had been insulting her in public years ago before World War One. She writes that she no longer recognizes her husband.
Wow. That is rough. And like that this is the period where they're not getting along. Not, the love triangle before they had their ups and downs, but
Bad news does not end there. It turns out that her goddaughter, Margot, got a hold of and put up for auction a package of letters from Liane to Valtess.
oof.
They sold for 60 francs, which is about $60 in today's US currency.
Oh my god, did she not learn anything from her grandmother? Don't show your legs for free.
Or for cheap. Liane calls this indecent treachery and said nothing would surprise her now that she would do. So there went that relationship. Liane and George would spend World War II in Switzerland, though George would die in 1945. Left alone and quite religious, Liane befriended a Dominican priest who became her confidant. She took an increasing interest in religion and eventually became a tertiary lay sister of the Order of St. Dominic. A tertiary in this case is basically a step below nuns, monks, anyone who took vows.
So what did they think about her and her former profession and the life that she led?
She got on quite well. She was quite popular with all of the staff, with all of the nuns and whatnot. She didn't really talk about her previous life as a courtesan now. It was almost as if she wanted to forget everything.
Hmm.
Instead, she's known as Sister Anne Marie, and she joins the nuns in caring for the kids with birth defects, though her age and health didn't let her stay at the Asylum of St. Agnes for the rest of her life. She would instead die in Switzerland in 1950 at the age of 81, though she is buried in the enclosure of the Sisters of the St. Agnes Asylum.
Quite the change in life circumstances.
Yes, we've gone from courtesan to princess to nun. Thanks so much for listening. Subscribe, check us out on Twitter if you want, and remember, if at first your love triangle doesn't work out, try again.